He's back in the Gulf to do deals, only there's a familiar ally that seems cut out of all the deal-making. Donald Trump on familiar ground in Saudi Arabia, where he made his first trip as president way back in 2017. The U.S. president may have said no to ceremonial Arabic coffee when he arrived, but certainly seemed ready to approve a landmark civilian nuclear agreement, Saudi investment in AI, and that nuclear agreement, which no longer seems linked to Riyadh normalizing ties with Israel. Israel also left out of Monday's release by Hamas of what's thought to be the last U.S. citizen held in the Gaza Strip, a goodwill gesture before Trump travels on to Qatar. Has Washington grown tired of Benjamin Netanyahu's forever war? Last month at the White House, the Israeli prime minister seemed caught off guard when Trump, in his presence, announced negotiations with Iran. Under Trump 1, the Saudis would have also pushed back hard. But Riyadh's relations with Tehran have since thawed. And if it's all about the money, after all, the President of the United States says he's not a man to turn down a free plane, then who's the highest bidder in this new chapter of transactional diplomacy? Today in the France 24 debate, we're talking about the deal-making in Saudi Arabia. And with us from Riyadh, geopolitics analyst and commentator Salman Al-Ansari. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Francois.
From Washington, Behnam Ben Taleblu, research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy's think tank. Good to see you.
Pleasure. Good to see you all.
Reena Basist is international correspondent for the Israeli Public Broadcasting Corporation.
Good evening.
How are you?
Very good, thank you.
From London, Andreas Krieg, senior lecturer at the School of Security Studies at King's College London. Welcome.
Good evening.
And France 24's Kedevan Gorgistani's been following every pronouncement of the U.S. president. How are you?
Good, thanks.
If you're on the go, by the way, you can always listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. And we begin with the big announcement coming in the last hours, which is in front of all of many of his important cabinet members, business leaders, the Saudi Crown Prince, Donald Trump, announcing the lifting of sanctions on Syria.
I will be ordering the cessation of sanctions against Syria in order to give them a chance at greatness. The sanctions were brutal and crippling and served as an important function, nevertheless, at the time. But now it's their time to shine. It's their time to shine. We're taking them all off, okay? They're going to show something special.
And this, Kedevan, follows that visit by Ahmed al-Shara here to Paris.
Yes, because that is something that is key for the new Syrian leadership as they try to sort of rebuild the country. That was his focus, lobbying for the lifting of European sanctions, but also of U.S. sanctions, especially when it comes to the country's economy that's basically in tatters. This is a huge win for the new Syrian leadership. The White House also just before Donald Trump's speech confirming that the U.S. president had agreed to say hello to the new Syrian president tomorrow in Riyadh. So we'll see if that happens. And most importantly, a formal meeting between Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the Syrian foreign minister in Turkey at some point this week. But really, the lifting of U.S. sanctions is very big for the Syrians. It's also a 180 for the position of the United States, because while the Europeans had started to lift some of the main sanctions, they really wanted to lobby the Americans to do the same. And the fact that he says, I'm lifting all sanctions, we'll see if that is actually true. Will they lift all sanctions in one go, or will it be a sort of gradual? Because we saw Emmanuel Macron talking about how this will be sort of incremental to see if the pledges of the new Syrian leadership would be met by actions and sort of a careful approach. What we heard from Donald Trump, at least, is a sort of all sanctions lifted. We're starting to normalize relations between the U.S. and Syria. So a sort of complete turnaround for U.S. policy.
A turnaround for U.S. policy. And Andreas Krieg, as Kedevan was just saying, With the dollar being the world's currency, this announcement means the Europeans can also go further. It's undoubtedly the most important announcement that we've heard this Tuesday.
Absolutely right. I mean, it's overdue, to be honest. We have to remember this. These are sanctions were supposed to be directed at the Assad regime. The Assad regime is now gone. And so al-Shara and the new government that is obviously in a very difficult consolidation phase are now really fighting an uphill battle. And it's quite important that the sanctions are being lifted. And obviously with the US Treasury potentially removing the sanctions, I do agree, most probably doing so gradually rather than instantly. We also have to be very careful with what Trump announces and how policy is being implemented. But nonetheless, this is a very, very clear signal for the Gulf to re-engage, for Europe to potentially engage, and for US companies to engage as well, in order to stabilize Syria, because the sanction regime were probably the greatest challenge, let's put it that way, greatest challenge to the security and the stability of the new government that's being built in Syria.
All right, big announcements also made with lots of zeros behind them in Riyadh. Amid all the captains of industry and tech in Donald Trump's company this Tuesday, the White House putting out a statement that the United States and Saudi Arabia had signed the largest defense sales agreement in history, nearly $142 billion. The U.S., according to Reuters, even dangling the prospect of F-35 fighter jet sales. F-35s only sold currently to one other Middle East state, Israel. Israel that's not on the schedule of this four-day visit. That is raising eyebrows in Jerusalem. Emerald Maxwell has more.
Hours after Hamas released American-Israeli hostage Eden Alexander in a gesture of goodwill to the Trump administration, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claimed some of the credit.
This was achieved thanks to our military pressure and the diplomatic pressure exerted by President Trump. This combination is a winning formula. I spoke today with President Trump. He told me, I am committed to Israel. I'm committed to continuing to work in close coordination with you.
Publicly, Trump hasn't criticized his Israeli counterpart. But behind the scenes, his administration has increasingly bypassed Israel. That was the case in its negotiations with Hamas over Eden Alexander, worked out with Egypt and Qatar, but also with the Houthis in Yemen, with whom the US cut a ceasefire deal that excluded Israel just days after a Houthi missile struck Tel Aviv airport, and Israel responded with attacks in Sana'a. Despite Israeli objections, Trump has also opened talks with Tehran on ending its nuclear program.
And that is not something that Benjamin Netanyahu wants Trump to do. He does not want a new Iranian nuclear deal. There's a number of different divergent points that have seemingly pushed the two leaders, if not necessarily the two states, on different paths.
Whereas Netanyahu has vowed to continue the war, ending it remains on Donald Trump's agenda. The US president's first trip to the Middle East since returning to the White House is taking in Saudi Arabia, Qatar and the UAE, but not Israel. Trump's administration says he will visit before the end of the year, though, mindful that US support of Israel remains important to his own political support at home, particularly from the evangelical Zionist movement.
Reena Basist, is Benjamin Netanyahu no longer flavor of the month at the White House?
I think that's an understatement. I think we are nearing a situation where we could practically call the relationship between the Trump administration and the Israeli government a crisis, a diplomatic crisis. Because the rift between the two administrations, between the two governments, we see it practically in every important arena for Israel. Of course, first of all, this visit of President Trump, and we know that the Israeli ambassador to Washington, Yechiel Leiter, has tried, first of all, to get Trump to include Israel in his Gulf visit. The White House declined. The White House also declined the proposal by the Israeli ambassador that Mr. Netanyahu would join one of the steps of this visit. That also, this proposal was declined. So Netanyahu is completely out of the visit. We know that the US is now negotiating with Iran an agreement that is not at all in the same perspective that Israel would have liked to see. Israel is hoping, or was hoping, for some kind of an agreement, the Libyan style, that Iran would agree to stop completely and eliminate completely its nuclear program. That's not going to happen. So on the Iranian arena, a very serious rift, if you look at it from the Israeli perspective. We have the Houthis, where Mr. Trump said, okay, we are stopping the campaign, not even mentioning the attacks on Israel. So, and the Houthis said, actually,
and
immediately after the agreement, that they will continue to target
Israel.
Israel.
Saying that in the last hours, there has been a missile intercepted coming from the Houthis.
Exactly. So we see it on Iran, we see it on the Houthis, we see it on this visit. We see it, of course, on Gaza. With the liberation of Idan Alexander, Israel was completely out of the picture. And we see it also on Syria, because not to forget that Israeli troops are on the buffer zone between Israel and Syria, and on the Syrian side of the Hermon Mount. And in all the talks with the Europeans about lifting the sanctions, the Israel is saying, no, you can't lift the sanctions. You know, we don't know how Mr. Ashara is going to act in the near future. I mean, there is the past of Al-Qaeda and so on. We have to be prudent. And then the French and the Europeans said, okay, we'll do it gradually. We won't lift everything together. And now on the stage, Mr. Trump is saying, that's it, no more American sanctions on the Syrians. I think Mr. Netanyahu has several issues to worry about.
And Behnam Ben Taleblu, the Israeli Prime Minister, saying that in the coming days, they're sending the army en masse into the Gaza Strip. Israel, which has bombed 2 hospitals in the last 24 hours in Gaza. Will there be any pushback from the White House?
Great to be with you all. Honestly, it seems like no. Very early on, the Trump administration was keen to be seen both from a political standpoint as well as from a policy standpoint. Yes, I concur there are some of those differences, some self-inflicted, some political, some fostered by the adversaries of Israel and America that are putting daylight or distance between U.S. and Israeli regional policy in the Middle East. But very early on, President Trump tried to do a 180 with respect to Biden's approach to Israel, and basically said, here are the weapons you need. There's no American, square peg, round hole political or military end state that we're going to foist onto the government of Jerusalem when it comes to what is and is not an acceptable end state. You had the President Trump actually in his first meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu, actually back in Washington, D.C., talk about potentially changing Gaza into some sort of a riverfront hotel scene. But it's basically been a free hand, and the free hand, I think, has allowed the president to basically push away from the table. The question is, how will the prime minister in Israel use that freer hand? There's the impending, re-invasion of large swaths of Gaza. How will they turn a military win into a political win? And will the Israeli prime minister choose to connect or disconnect the dots between success against what's left of Hamas, the proxy of the Islamic Republic, with some of the larger political issues that he may have with Washington's approach towards the patron of Hamas, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran?
In his speech, Salman al-Ansari, Donald Trump saying the people of Gaza deserve a much better future. That drew a lot of applause. Was the applause because the people in the room were endorsing Donald Trump's approach, or was it an awkward moment?
Great. Hi to you and to your honorable guests and all the viewers. First of all, we must look at President Trump's visit to Riyadh not only from merely a bilateral relationship or from the lens of bilateral relationship, and not solely from a Middle Eastern regional perspective, but through a broader and profound vision that touches on the future shape of the Middle East and the US policy. If you remember, in the EU a couple of years ago, there has been this very beautiful word which has been repeated a lot, which is strategic sovereignty and strategic autonomy of the EU. I believe the US right now, with the help of Saudi Arabia, is re-establishing its own strategic sovereignty in its policies with regards to the Middle East. And we see this as a very positive development. Why? Because if we look at how the US has been actually conducting its policies in the Middle East, it has always been prioritizing the demands of Israel without going after analyzing the US interest per se. And the US seems to be going on a direction that will not have a setback with regards to not having dictates from anyone. And we believe whatever is good for America is good for the entire world and good for the Middle East per se.
Just to be clear on this point, are U.S. interests more aligned with those of Saudi Arabia or more aligned with those of Israel?
Okay, that's a big question, and we can actually have a complete episode just speaking about it. But I think when it comes to interests, when it comes to vital interests for the United States, absolutely, Saudi Arabia is more important. It's the leader of the Arab and Muslim world, and it's also the country with that is considered to be a G20 nation, and it's the biggest economy in the Middle East. And the Saudi government has been repeatedly saying to the US that your interests are not on supporting blindly the likes of Netanyahu. So that's why it was really upsetting for us and actually funny to see how the Israeli government was projecting this kind of discontent with regards to the idea of not including them or with regards to the Israeli-Saudi normalization, because they wanted to become like as a prerequisite for any Saudi big deal with the United States, including the peaceful nuclear cooperation. This is not going to happen through the dictates or the likes of Netanyahu. This is, I think, something of the past, and it's an old option, and we should not even think about it. Right now, we should think of having constructive dialogue that can actually lead the Middle East to a peaceful place. Netanyahu has been, this is how I think President Trump views Netanyahu. Netanyahu has been seen primarily as a free rider, as someone who used Trump a lot. Let's not forget, in his first administration, he milked President Trump, and President Trump gave him more things that he could have ever imagined, like the Golan Heights recognition, transferring the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, green light for expansion of settlements, and also the Abraham Accords. He let Israel to have countries in the Gulf and the Arab world to normalize relations with. Then what did Netanyahu, or what did President Trump got in return? Because the art of the deal is all about take and give. He got in return adventures in Syria, rigidity in Gaza, and also a complete disregard for the U.S. desires of having peace and dialogue rather than confrontations, because Israel, as we know, has been influencing even inner circles of Trump, and this is not something to be seen positively. So I think for the interest of Israeli citizens, they should view Trump's coldness with Netanyahu as a positive development, because he is helping the Israeli public from the self-destructive policies of Benjamin Netanyahu.
So, Reena Basist, what happens next week? Does the Israeli army go in en masse into Gaza? Does Donald Trump tell them, no, we're not giving you any more weapons at that point, or the U.S. won't care?
I don't think they will stop the shipment of ammunition or weapons, at least not for now. And we know that the agreement that was reached a couple of years ago under the Obama administration goes until 2028. After that, we don't know. We don't know if the US, if Washington will resume the enormous aid package, the security package it is offering Israel every year. So I don't think this is going to happen now. But of course, the question is, will Netanyahu decide on relaunching this big military operation that he's been preparing for several weeks now, even several months now? And judging by what is going on in Riyadh, that seems to be becoming more and more complicated. for Netanyahu every minute that goes by.
Will the country
Now,
rally behind him, or is he in trouble as prime minister?
It depends who you are asking, because on the one hand, of course, you have his base, and his base is supporting continuing the war until Hamas is completely eliminated. But then you have the other half of the country, if I may say, and the families of the hostages who are calling on Netanyahu not to get into such an adventure, to pursue every effort. And we know that there is a delegation today, an Israeli delegation today, that went to Qatar together with the two American envoys, with Steve Witkoff and Adam Boehler. If really these negotiations advance, then Mr. Netanyahu would not be able to justify relaunching such an operation.
Behnam Ben Talebou, did you agree with what Salman al-Ansari said, that, of course, U.S. interests are much more aligned with Saudi Arabia's? And by the way, we saw all those zeros behind the numbers put forth in those deals that were announced, than with Israel?
Well, there's a lot of things that have been said, but actually, speaking of zeros, this is not a zero-sum game. The pillars, particularly in the post-1979 American vision for order in the Middle East, is inclusive of both different traits, different attributes that Israel brings to the table for the United States of America, and different traits, different attributes that the Saudis, as well as other GCC members, bring to the table. Most importantly, I would say with the Saudis is swing production, something that's really been able to keep the U.S.-Saudi relationship afloat despite changing politics in Washington, and then much more recently changing politics in Riyadh. So different strokes for different folks here, and a good deal maker, a good kind of master of the art of the deal, if you will, can actually ride both. Just like President Trump at home right now, back here in Washington, is riding two very different currents of foreign policy thinking when it comes to how to prioritize values and interests in the Middle East. You know, one camp more likely called, more kind of colloquially called isolationist, and then the other camp more colloquially called internationalist. I think the president has thus far been able to quite deftly ride both. And I would say in the Middle East, he will be able to, at least thus far, based on term one, as well as what we've seen in the past few months of term two, be able to ride both, because this need not be a zero-sum game. Take a look at the civil nuclear deal, for example. I, for one, and as an American who sees the American order in the Middle East and whatever future vision President Trump has about that regional order, still being heavily centered around the Saudis and the Israelis, the traditional bastions of geopolitics and geoeconomics in the region. But if you can't foster or force an Abraham Accords 2.0, you need not sacrifice counterproliferation policy on that altar. If there is a good civil nuclear deal to be had, much like that which exists with respect to the United Arab Emirates just next door, that is a 1, 2, 3 agreement that, for example, doesn't need to force the Saudis to do something that they're not ready to do, or doesn't need to square peg, round hole Israeli domestic politics with Israeli foreign policy about normalizing ties with bigger Arab nations, well, then go for the deal that you can achieve. So I would say President Trump is focusing on the art of the possible and riding these different currents at the same time.
Andres Krieg, a civil nuclear deal with Saudi Arabia, is that the prelude to nuclear proliferation in the region?
I don't think so. I don't think anybody has a real interest in nuclear proliferation in the region. Obviously, the standard, the threshold is being set by the Iranians here, and the Saudis have made it very clear that whatever the Iranians have and whatever they're being granted in a potential deal, the Saudis want as well. And it seems that the Iranians will retain some capability of enrichment at home, which also then means that the Saudis want enrichment at home. But there are different kind of models to do this. So one model is this sort of a black box approach whereby a US company is actually doing and supervising the enrichment within Saudi Arabia without Saudis having access to the actual enrichment process. And another one would be where Saudi uranium is exported overseas, enriched overseas, and re-imported. I mean, that's another sort of potential deal. I think there are the elements of the 1, 2, 3 agreement, they will have to really be ironed out before we can actually see how enrichment will actually look like. But in the end of the day, I mean, energy security for Saudi Arabia is extremely important, and it's something that the Trump administration is catering for, and they will consider this in their policy moving forward.
8 long years ago, Donald Trump's first foreign trip was, in fact, to Saudi Arabia, where he briefly joined, people will remember that ceremonial sword dance which would soon be followed by arms sales. There you see him with the king. Kedevan Gorgestani, when you think back, and you were covering the White House for us back then, to Trump 1, again, today's optics are very different.
Yes, and I think to go back to what one of the guests was talking about, which is the sort of the two wings or the two movements under Donald Trump when it comes to international relations, I think what happened today and what has been happening in the past few weeks as far as Donald Trump's policy towards Israel and towards the Gulf is proof that Donald Trump doesn't have an ideology when it comes to supporting Israel. He doesn't have an ideology when it comes to supporting or doing deals with the Gulfs. He wants to make deals. He wants a deal no matter who is on which side of the deal, the winning or the losing deal. One thing that has to be said is that within his administration, you have some people who are very ideological about their support to Israel. They're sort of the old neocons, the hawks.
Like his U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee.
Like his U.S. ambassador, Mike Huckabee, like his former national security advisor, Mike Waltz, who has been sent over to the United Nations. And the reporting is that partly it's because he was doing back-channel talks with the Israelis to prepare for strikes on Iran. Mike Waltz, a huge hawk of Iran, very opposed to a deal on Iran. Marco Rubio used to be that way too. But what you see is that Donald Trump, unlike the Republicans that have come before, and even unlike most Democrats that have come before him, doesn't have the sort of unconditional support, sort of ideologic, historic support for Israel. He sees Israel as yet another deal to be made. That's not necessarily true of everybody in his administration, but it seems that that wing is slowly maybe taking over the sort of older or more traditional Republican hawks.
And the question is why? Reena Basist, what happened to, as Salman al-Ansari was recalling it, the Donald Trump who moved the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem?
Yes, and we remember also the 2020 Abraham Accords, and Trump, when he came back, when he was re-elected, he was talking so much about it. That would be his heritage, that would be his gift for the world. That would be perhaps also the reason why he should get the Nobel Prize. And the idea at the time was that Saudi Arabia would join these Abraham Accords, that Saudi Arabia would get a defense pact with the US. And of course, a defense pact, you need the agreement of the Senate. And then we go back to all of this traditional support of Israel, because a two-thirds majority of the Senate, Mr. Trump would only get it if Saudi Arabia would normalize ties with Israel. We are in a different situation now. Both Washington and Riyadh backed away from this idea of a defense pact. We are only going for the money. We are only going for the big investment, for these deals of millions and trillions of money, where the Senate and the Congress cannot stand by Israel's side to put these conditions of normalizing ties, of changing this setup, this geopolitical setup in the Middle East. And then, effectively, Israel finds itself out of the picture. That's where Mr. Netanyahu stands today.
All right, you talk about money. Ahead of the trip, CNN reported that the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, advised him. Kushner, whose Affinity Partners investment fund benefits from $2 billion in Saudi money. In the past year, it's also gotten $1.5 billion of extra cash from Abu Dhabi-based Lunat and Qatar's sovereign wealth fund. So, do politics and family business mix? Well, it seems so, reports Kemi Knight.
In Dubai, Oman, or Doha, the Trump Organization has been expanding its business ventures in the Gulf, building skyscrapers, golf courses, and luxury real estate, and blurring the boundary between business and government. Conflict of interest took centre stage in Dubai last month, when Eric Trump and Zach Witkoff, the son of Trump's envoy to the Middle East, announced that MGX, a fund backed by Abu Dhabi, would be making a $2 billion business deal with Binance using the Trump firm's cryptocurrency.
Europe has become a lost cause. It really has, and that hurts my feelings to say, but they are impossible to deal with, and it is impossible to get them to the word yes. If I'm building a great golf course somewhere.
Meanwhile, a private equity firm owned by Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law, raised $2 billion from a Saudi public investment fund, also taking investment from sovereign wealth funds from Qatar and the UAE. Trump's conglomerate, meanwhile, is now run by his sons, but he's still linked to it via a trust and retains his ownership stake in the organisation. Questions are now being raised as to whether Trump will be holding meetings in the Gulf as President of the United States or as a Trump Organization shareholder.
This is a president who has actually lost money for being president of the United States. I don't remember these same type of questions being asked of my predecessor about a career politician who was clearly profiting off of this office. That is not what President Trump does, and this White House holds ourselves to the highest of ethical standards.
But just this week, the president has come under fire for accepting a luxury jumbo jet worth $400 million as a gift from Qatar's royal family to be used as his Air Force One presidential plane.
The conflicts of interest that Donald Trump has are multifaceted. Going to countries where he has those business interests, making new deals with entities that are tied to those countries, and now accepting a massive gift from one of those countries. We've just never seen anything like this, and it's a kind of brazen behavior that appears on its face corrupt.
The acting Syrian president, who's hoping to meet Trump in person during his Gulf visit, appears to have understood how to do business with his US counterpart, offering him the opportunity to build a Trump Tower in Damascus.
Yeah, let me ask you, Ben Taleblu, about the attitude in Washington to all of this. I mean, we've seen pushback from like the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, who tweeted nothing says America First like Air Force One brought to you by Qatar. It's not just bribery, it's premium foreign influence with extra legroom. Are people shocked by these blurring of the lines?
This is one of those questions where, at least in Washington, doing a bit more reporting than analysis right now, where you stand in life depends on where you sit. If you were predisposed to be skeptical of Trump family ties to the region, if you were predisposed to be critical of the more transactional nature of President Trump's diplomacy, not just in the region, but with respect to other much more traditional partners, then this will be setting off alarm bells. And conversely, if you think the president can do no wrong, well, this is framed, particularly in the increasingly partisan debates back here in Washington, where I live and work, as no, this is some kind of move of 4D chess. I do think each and every single one of those claims do need to be taken apart, because one of these things is not like the other. And perhaps the most electric one, the most interesting one, is the Boeing case that you mentioned with respect to Qatar, where, yes, there is actually some Trump defenders are putting forward a long-standing claim by President Trump back in term one to actually get parts rehabbed for the two Air Force One planes that do exist in the slow process by Boeing and the other defense industrial contractors that go into it. But at the same time, many are really taking a step back, even traditional pro-Israel kind of old school Republican defenders of President Trump in term one and in term two, seeing this high level move by the Qatari government as not being divorced from the other more nefarious things that those forces are critical of Qatar of, which is hosting some of those terrorist organizations and more. So certainly the plane offer, I should say, is probably the most electric political element of the president's trip, rather than any of the deals. I think with respect to Saudi Arabia, it was 600 billion, if I'm not mistaken, that had the potential to create 2 million jobs. None of that stuff is thus far really being talked about. The things thus far being talked about are the foreign policy elements of his first speech. There was a lot there said about Syria, a lot there said about Iran, a lot there said about a fundamentally different region, as well as, of course, the funding and the finances.
Andreas Krieg, how about seen from London? What's the view on all this and on that visit to Qatar that's still upcoming?
I think we've been focused too much on the ATM element of the Gulf states. We're looking at them as some sort of, contributing to a pay-to-play scheme. Well, there is an element to that, but it's not just transactionalism based on financial or economic sort of networks and utility, but there is an element of utility as well in terms of what these Gulf states can offer to the Trump administration, which is probably more important than just putting hundreds of billions of dollars into the U.S. economy. And I think this aspect that we haven't talked about is the fact that the Gulf states, and most importantly Qatar, Oman, but also the Saudis, are contributing to actually building relationships, de-escalating after the 7th of October and allowing certain deals to come forward between state actors, non-state actors, to kind of create a new umbrella for regional integration that includes the Iranians, that includes potentially the Houthis, and that includes other non-state actors, such as the HDS al-Shara government in Syria. These sort of deals are absolutely instrumental if the United States, under the mega grand strategy, wants to withdraw bit by bit gradually from the region. It needs to delegate statecraft to the GCC. And I think that's where Qatar is playing a leading role. That's where Oman is playing a leading role. And that's also where the Saudis are playing a very important role, particularly as we're approaching a potential deal with Iran. And I think we need to stop just looking at or focusing transactionally at what these countries can invest in the US and look more at institutionally what can these countries offer the US in terms of forging relations across the region, building stability, rather than contributing like what Israel is doing, contributing to further escalation across the region.
So this is where it gets confusing for us, Reena Basist, and thankfully you're here to clear it up for us. There are these two aides to Benjamin Netanyahu who took money from the Qataris. What's in it for the Qataris? What's in it for Netanyahu?
Well, this is a scandal or an affair that started well before, this is what we are discovering little by little, well before the October 7. And suspicions are that 2, maybe 3 aides of Netanyahu, whether they were or were not on the payroll of his office.
Yeah, it's allegations.
Yes, it's allegations, received one way or another some financial support, let's call it like that, from the Qatari government or from people that worked for the Qatari government. And the idea was that these people would help them to orchestrate some sort of a PR campaign in Israel to better the image of Qatar. And we know that well before October 7, Qatar played a very essential role in helping transfer funds to Hamas so they could rule Gaza with the support of the Netanyahu government, which was part of it, but it was Qatari money. So the Qatarians were playing, if these allegations are proven to be true, were playing on both fields. They were supporting, on one hand, the Hamas regime, and then on the other hand, they were also working to present themselves as a peaceful-seeking country, a country that is very interested in sports, because these aides of Netanyahu apparently also helped them to promote the soccer championship.
The World Cup, yeah.
Yes, the World Cup, to show Qatar in different colors, not as a terror-supporting country, but a more Western country, closer to our values. So it's not sure if these people really were guilty of any criminal acts. But obviously, if any of these allegations come true, then the question is raised. How come that people so close to Netanyahu had some relationship with Qatar, while Qatar was supporting Hamas, and while Qatar, which is not defined, we are not a country, it's not a country Israel at war with, but certainly not a country that Israel is friendly or has any diplomatic relationship with.
So, Salman Ansari, relations between Saudi Arabia and Qatar haven't always been rosy. What do you see as the role of Qatar right now?
Yeah, as you know, we have had this rift, a big rift between Saudi Arabia and Qatar over our grievances with regards to their support of the Muslim Brotherhood, etc., and non-state actors. But I think, to be honest with you, and I'm not being just following the government talking points, but in reality, they have actually rectified their trajectory a lot. They have made things better, but definitely you can't be a perfect country. But at the same time, we are right now having a prosperous relationship with the Qataris. We have constant communication with them, and we believe that the future of the region will be less ideologic and will become more pragmatic. So I think overall, Saudi-Qatar relationship is on the right direction, and we should not exaggerate the talking about their involvement before with Hamas, because that was true in a big manner, but it was all by the request of Netanyahu himself. If we're gonna go and allow ourselves to criticize Qatar for their support of Hamas before, we should equally condemn Netanyahu himself for his support of Hamas. But we don't see this in the media a lot, and it sounds actually really weird for people. But that was the truth, because he wanted to create this rift between Ramallah and Gaza. And if there is one thing that the Netanyahu government has in common with the Iranian regime, it would simply be the killing of the two-state solution by rebranding it as the two-state delusion. But I think the Saudi government with its allies are working hard, and more than 147 countries have recognized Palestine, including Ireland, Norway, and Spain just last year. And President Macron of France has said that he will follow suit very soon. So Saudi Arabia is reviving the two-state solution. Saudi Arabia is showing the world that there must be a solution for this 7-8 decade conflict and colonization. It's sad to see this dehumanization of Palestinians. We want them to live with dignity. We want them to have a statehood, because that's what they deserve. Otherwise, we are just being hypocritical and just going against all what we believe with regards to human rights and humanity. So
yeah, France, which has said it may recognize Palestinian statehood at a conference at the UN in New York next month. Reena Basist was mentioning the last Football World Cup. When Donald Trump sits down with the Saudi Crown Prince, it's also the hosts of the next two World Cup finals who are sitting down together. And once again, the FIFA boss, Gianni Infantino, was present, who was, by the way, present at Trump's inauguration, was also in the frame on this trip. Ketevan Gorjestani, why do we keep seeing Gianni Infantino at all these events?
Well, Gianni Infantino, first of all, is always there when the Qataris or the Saudis are involved. I saw him, for example, at the Olympics in Paris over the summer, coming to see a volleyball match that involved the Qatari team, and he was part of their guests in the stands. But obviously, there is the World Cup in the United States, Saudi Arabia, all of that. So it's all about business. It's all about business. We talked a lot earlier about all the CEOs that were in the delegation, but Gianni Infantino and sports and the business of sports is also a huge part of it.
All about business. It's quite a contrast when you see Donald Trump's transactional diplomacy with, for instance, Barack Obama, his first trip to the region in 2009, where he spoke of a new beginning with the Muslim world. In a speech at Cairo University, he talked up rule of law, equal administration of justice, human rights. Let me ask you, Andreas Krieg, is the United States different, or is it just, two different echo chambers of the same country?
Well, I mean, we have to differentiate between U.S. foreign and security policy and Trump foreign and security policy. Although I would say that the retrenchment and the withdrawal of the United States from the region hasn't started with Trump term one, but it started with Barack Obama. So the realization in the Gulf has been that the United States are no longer there to serve as the sort of hegemon in the region. And more than that, I mean, Barack Obama was very good with words. He was very good in sugarcoating interest in beautiful narratives about values and about norms. But in reality, he didn't really deliver on it. He didn't deliver it in Palestine. He didn't deliver it during the Arab Spring. And so this void of U.S. leadership has been there for nearly 20 years now. And Trump is saying, OK, we will not return to pre-2008 sort of U.S. leadership, which was a neoconservative one, but we will try to lead from behind by delegating to local partners. Whoever is in sync with us, we're willing to work through them and with them at the same time. I think that is more in keeping with a general redefinition of U.S. foreign and security policy. And Trump is actually, the MAGA campaign and MAGA agenda is really putting it to an extreme level. But I think that sort of transactionalism is not going to be reversed in 4 years' time with the next president.
We'll have to leave it there. Well, many thanks, Andreas Krieg, for being with us from London. I want to thank Salman Al-Ansari in Riyadh, Benham Ben Taliblu in Washington, Reena Basist, Ketevan Gorjestani. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.